1964 convention, political panel.
Will Carlson.
Distinguished visitors, ladies and gentlemen. My understanding is your annual convention is being the 49th, as is very while you're listening with one ear to each of the candidates, you'll be using one hand as a part of your brain to write down questions that may be coming to mind. And we'll have a few of them to get started as soon as the candidates have completed their introductory remarks. More will come as we go along. First of all, our initial guest, the Republican candidate for Governor of South Dakota, the President Lieutenant Governor Nils Boe.
Mr. Moderator Will, President Ben Radcliffe, members of the South Dakota Farmers Union organization. As the leadoff man, so to speak, in this group of persons, I am very happy, to say the least, to be here with you today. Usually, on an occasion such as this, I am at the tail end of the batting order, and it does give me a great deal of pleasure to have the opportunity of leading off today and to commend this organization for giving the opportunity for we, the candidates seeking state as well as national office, to come before you and to expound, if you may call it such, or explain some of our views with regard to the matters at issue today. Probably more important, however, is the information that we can receive from you, the voters and the electorate of the state of South Dakota. It seems that in the past number of years that we, no matter what profession, vocation, or occupation that we are in, seem to rally ourselves around certain groups, whether we be lawyers, whether we be doctors, whether we be merchants, or whether we be farmers. We associate ourselves with these groups, and unfortunately, to an extent, there oftentimes occurs a lack of communication between the particular group, whether it be a retailers association or an oil dealers association or a farmers organization. There seems to be a lack of communication sometimes between the various segments of our economy, of the peoples of this state, and yes, particularly with respect to those candidates who may be seeking public office. I certainly am happy to see the interest that you, men and women, members of this association, representing the greatest industry that we have in the state of South Dakota, agriculture, taking the interest and the time away from your individual pursuits and coming here today, willing to listen to the candidates. And I only ask one particular further request from you, that the interest which you have manifested today and which you may continue to manifest and evidence up until November 3rd, 1964, will not cease on that particular day, but that the interest which you are showing will continue insofar not only as the candidates who are to be elected, but they will continue on each and every day thereafter, 365 days of each and every year, with regard to the issues, the problems that face not only your respective communities, the state of South Dakota, but also the United States of America. We have been asked in 10 minutes to state or make some introductory remarks. I think that we should probably say at the outset, so far as I am concerned, that the greatest problem that's facing the industry of agriculture, you people, as well as any and all persons throughout the state of South Dakota, is this ever-increasing problem of taxation. It is one which is becoming so burdensome. It is one which is becoming so taxing in itself that when you proceed throughout the state of South Dakota in many areas, I think even slight depressions with regard to industry, business, and the economy of our state can be found. It is for that reason that I think we, as South Dakotans, must first of all direct our attention to a means whereby not only your agricultural lands can be the subject of a reduction of the property tax, but that this same property tax be given a relief and a reduction in all areas, whether they be municipalities or farmlands in the state of South Dakota. Unless we do so, Unless we give relief, unless we put the smile back upon the property taxpayer's face in the state of South Dakota, we will not, I am sure, be in a position to proceed forward and progress in the manner that we all must do. There are many solutions to this. I know that we can spend hours in arguing back and forth as to the additional types of taxes that could be invoked and spread upon the people of the state of South Dakota, as well as throughout the United States of America, for that matter. But the question is not, in my opinion, as to what further or additional taxes we can add, because all too unfortunately we find that in the attempt to give relief to the property taxpayer by the addition of another tax, nothing happens whatsoever. And the net result is that we not only have the same tax which you originally have, but we have another tax which we may be paying, if not directly, indirectly. Because there is one thought, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to leave with you. No matter what tax is put on the people of this state, no matter what tax is put on any particular segment of our economy, whatever we may want to call it, one indisputable fact comes back, that it seems in our economic system, in our way of life, that the tax is pushed on, moved on, and moved on, so that ultimately it becomes you, and me who are paying the tax, the ordinary citizens of the state of South Dakota. And it is for that reason that I sometimes think that instead of spending so much time trying to conjure up a new means of finding an additional tax or a new type of tax, that we look to some of the basic issues which confront us. One, I think that if we are to have property tax relief in the state of South Dakota, there must be legislation enacted whereby a formula is set up by the legislature of this state that whatever additional funds come down from the state level to the local political subdivision of school districts or whatever else we might term it, that a reduction will accordingly be granted in a degree to be determined upon your local property tax. Unless such a formula is enacted by legislative act, I feel sure that in many areas of the state alone, we will not have the reduction that we are seeking. There is one other area that I wish to call your attention to which I think sometimes we have not given the fullest exploration. We have not given the fullest amount of effort. Agriculture has been and is the greatest industry we have in the state of South Dakota. And correspondingly, the burden of taxation, the burden of the expense of the operation of our government, of the operation of our schools, of our welfare departments, of our health departments, and all the services afforded by government is thrown upon an industry such as agriculture and the property owner. And I think it is time that we must recognize in the state of South Dakota that we should go out not only with the idea, as I have said before, trying to find a new tax, but try to go out and see if we can't stimulate, engender, and build up other industries, other types of economy in the state of South Dakota, so that it can help take this load off of the principal industry of agriculture. What do we have? I find upon reviewing the record that in 1953, we had a budget, or a total amount of appropriations, which were made by our legislature for all the services performed by state government, all the expenses of state government, in the amount of $46 million. In 1964, after the conclusion of this legislative session, ladies and gentlemen, this same amount was $80 million. Now, we have not added any general taxes at the state level. Yes, we have put another tax on beer, cigarettes, and liquor, and added it to hotels and motels, but there have been no further taxes added at the state level. The increase in the amount of our revenue and our income is due to the fact that we have been trying to see if other industries cannot be brought up into the same plane as agriculture, so that this burden of taxation, if they own property, can also be put on the tax rolls, and they can share in the cost of government. One of the most startling facts that I think face us today, and which many do not realize, is that we have at our back door today, and existing today, the industry of tourism, which in 1953, ladies and gentlemen, brought $153 million of income into the state of South Dakota. In 1964, this particular year, the total amount of income is $165 million, a $15 million increase. It has been projected by those who have been studying this question that if we will continue to try to promote such additional industries as tourism and the like, particularly with the tourist industry, that by 1970 we can have an annual income, mind you, an annual income in South Dakota of from $500 to $700 million. Now this is the sort of thing that I think farm organizations, all organizations, whether they be Chamber of Commerce's or anything, should put their shoulder to the wheel to see if we cannot accomplish. Why? Not because we say that agriculture will not continue to be our principal industry. It always will. It will always be the basic industry for South Dakota. But we must turn our attention to try to develop such additional industries, such additional economies as tourism, which will bring this capital, which will bring the income and revenue in, and give us a chance to spread the cost of the operation of government to others than just to yourselves and other property owners. It is to this end that I hope I, if elected governor, would direct a large time and a large portion of my attention, not with the idea of saying what we have is not good enough, but with the idea of saying let us give relief by going forward, progressing, and trying to produce new industries, new types of economies in this state, which will help all of those which we have and which have done so much to give us the great South Dakota that we have today. Thank you very much for the opportunity of being able to be with you.
Thank you very much, Will. I'm glad you got used to a microphone finally. President Radcliffe, friend Nils, and fellow candidates, I'm very happy to be here with you. My father, who will be 80 in April, has been a member of the Farmers Union for years and years. My brother-in-law, who operates the farm in Lyman County, he and my sister live there where I was born and raised, is a member of your organization. I asked Ben, and he said that the garden that I took care of for years until my wife finally had to take over that job this year wasn't big enough to qualify me, so I'm not a member. I'm a lawyer from Chamberlain. Many of you know me personally. My running mate for Lieutenant Governor is a farmer from Brown County, Bob Chamberlain. I feel that my background, the background of Mr. Chamberlain, is farm and agricultural within this state. My program, as I announced last February, was a 25% aid to schools from the state level. To get it, I had to obtain additional money. I said that we didn't have enough in the general fund cushion to take it to increase it to that amount, and that before we started trying to tax people in South Dakota any further, it was time that we reached the out-of-state businesses who are in competition with our people here who are not now paying. That's the program I stood on then, and that's the program I stand on now. I said in addition to that I thought recreational development should proceed faster than it had been, and that along the Missouri River the federal government should be called in to bear a good share of the cost. We've given up thousands of acres and millions of dollars of valuation, and it's nothing but right that the federal people in return should help develop that for the good of South Dakota. And then finally I said that we should have industrial development in this state, and that we'd been passing up an opportunity at Pierre repeatedly to use this low-cost energy from the Missouri River transported over REA lines in order to bring that industrial development to this state. We have unlimited low-cost electrical energy from those dams, almost unlimited. We have unlimited water. We have the opportunity for the industrial development. We have not made use of it. Now, you heard that the spending between 1953 and the present in 10 years has almost doubled in the state. I'm not sure at all that that's anything of which we should be particularly proud. The spending has doubled in large part because you had commission after commission and board after board without having proper supervision of that, and you had an awful lot of money slipping through fingers up there, which is taxpayers' money. And I propose, in addition to the other things, to tighten up on the boards and commissions and see to it that there is a responsibility on the part of those boards and commissions that that money be accounted for. I think there's been a lack of responsibility on the part of those boards and commissions at Pier. Now, on the age of schools. It used to be, Will, are you keeping a watch on me? I forgot to look at mine. You do it. It used to be, beginning back in the Middle Ages really, that property was the only indication of the ability of a man to pay taxes. The king would grant so much land out here to a baron or to an earl, and then he had the people working for him, and in time of war he furnished so many soldiers, and in time of peace he gave so many loads of grain or so many head of cattle to the government, and that was the taxes. Now that's no longer true, you know. You take a man like Edgar Bergen with a $250 piece of wood, call him Charlie McCarthy and insure him for $1 million, he's still a $250 piece of wood. He can go out here and before income tax can earn more than a person who was farming all of the farm area within one of our South Dakota counties. So that something has to be done. The big load went onto the property taxpayer in this state basically with the 55 tax law, when it went off utilities. In Pennington County alone, 59,000 off the electric light companies in just 1 year, and over 59,000 off the telephone companies in just 1 year, and on to other business places and on to the farms and other property in Pennington County. And the same thing happened all over the state. You can't go back and you can't retrace those steps, and you can't go and say, now we're going to dump the load back. But you can ease off this constant upward spiral, $3 to $5 million more on our property tax every year. And it isn't just the farmer, it's the business place up and down Main Street that's moving out of town, out into the country to get away from the school tax levy, a lot of it. So in order to correct it, I've suggested this 25% aid. It means getting this additional money, and it means holding the line on other spending for a period of a couple of years. And it's going to take some strict watchdog economy up there to get it done. But it can be done, and it is the only way that I've heard of that it can be done. I'm willing to listen to another suggestion. None has been forthcoming. So I have proposed, have advocated this. I shall continue to advocate it until election. 25% aid to schools. Your consequent property tax relief. It will assist the industrial development of the state. It will bring industry to the state, not drive it out. And we have an opportunity to once more move South Dakota forward. I think it's very important that you're going to have President Johnson and Vice President Humphrey for 4 years. It's quite obvious. I think that I can work with them and with Senator McGovern and with others in Washington for a beneficial farm program. My personal thought is that the cutting of your price supports on feed grains was the start of all of the trouble in the farm economy. It drove the price of chickens down to where a farmer couldn't afford to raise them. And then after a certain amount of time, hogs went down, and now beef is on its way down. And once you cut your price support out from underneath your feed grains, your farm economy started into a slump. And something has got to be done on the national level to correct it. If I'm your governor, I'll work with them to try and get it done.
South Dakota, from Nils Boe and John Franklin, that I hope that questions will be coming toward our platform shortly. In the meantime, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce the Congressman from the 1st District of South Dakota, Ben Reifel.
Moderator Will, President Bob, distinguished guests, friends. I don't think I should have this time counted against mine, because I want to say something about your national legislative liaison officer in Washington, Mr. Johnson, whom all of you who are members know very well. The 2 years that I served on the Committee on Agriculture, he certainly attended every meeting and saw to it that the policies of your organization were adequately and effectively represented before our committee. And since friend Ben has become your state president, he has vigorously presented your views, your policies as an organization effectively before the committees of Congress, and certainly to me as a representative of the 1st District of South Dakota. Now, I must say at the outset that in some instances we were not in agreement, but this is only human. In some instances, my wife doesn't agree with me either. It's always a pleasure for me to be associated with the rural people of South Dakota. Had a delightful time at a farm auction sale yesterday up in Day County to visit and talk with the farmers and the problems they are facing at present time. And when I shake hands with a farmer or his wife, I know that there is a solid grip in the handshake, and know that they put in many hours on the farm, as I did as a kid growing up on a family farm in Todd County. And back in those days, just like in other segments of our economy today, probably not so much in the agricultural sector, we had the 8-hour day, as you have the 8-hour day. 8 hours in the forenoon and 8 hours in the afternoon. After leaving the farm, about 19 years of age, I went down to Brookings to the School of Agriculture. And there are in the audience individuals like Mr. Hanson back there, and I don't know whether Ronald Leonhardt is here, or Virgil Gilbert, who happens to be the president of Beadle County Rural Electric. But we were classmates in school together. And while I was going to school there were those who thought because I was identified with an Indian tribe that back in those tough days with the late 20s and the early 30s that I must be getting some kind of a grant from the federal government in order to keep myself in school. And I had to inform them that I was doing the best I could to work my way through school just like they were. Except I did have an added advantage. I had quite a pull around the college. I was milking cows for 25 cents an hour down at the dairy barn. And through the years I have acquired a lot of close friends in agriculture, on the farms. Emil Lorix back there is one of them. And it's their letters, and phone calls, and personal comments on which I've relied in the past, more than anything else, to reach decisions that are important to agriculture. It is this reason I have not hesitated to cross party lines when necessary as far as farm issues are concerned. And of course, you will recall that I was one out of 2 wheat states in this part of the country among the Republicans to cross over and vote for the wheat bill. It is this reason why I have not hesitated, of course, to do this. And I believe this position has been vindicated when some of my Republican friends who had urged me to oppose it were among the first to sign up for the program. This is not the first time I've crossed over party lines on important issues to the farms of South Dakota that are vital to our state, and let me assure you it will not be the last time. I have consistently used this principle as a guideline in determining farm votes, and I assure you I will never hesitate to cross party lines to support programs farmers really want and really need. I've always believed a majority of South Dakota farmers want and need a floor on their income, not a ceiling. They want the decision making in their hands. They want freedom from control and regulations, but they do not want overnight freedom from price support programs
and they also want a strong REA. As your congressman, I have a duty and an obligation today to report to you on the status of farmers and farm legislation in Congress. In approaching farm legislation, both parties now concur that farmers won't accept mandatory control programs and that price support programs must be on a voluntary basis. A major concern today is for the future of the livestock industry, which makes up the bulk of South Dakota's farm income. Most of the farmers agree this industry should continue free from controls. The big disagreement is in the area of meat imports. A compromise bill was passed this Congress and provides for a minor cutback at the 1963 price levels, or levels of import. And I fear it will be far less helpful to the beef producers of South Dakota than the original House bill, which I supported and voted for. I think it goes without saying that no political party has had a monopoly on success in dealing with the farm problems, yet each administration must be held responsible for its record. This administration has the responsibility to tell the American farmer that they are going to raise the farm parity from 74%, which is the lowest since the Depression. What are they going to do to stop the migration of farm at the rate of 100,000 a year? What are they going to do to raise the net realized farm income, which is lower than in 1960? These questions are not matters for partisan debate. These issues are vital, more vital than that, for it is time that we wake up and realize what is happening to the American farmer. I'm reminded of the elderly farm couple that had their grandson come and spend a week with them during his school vacation. And he was an inquisitive lad, and so while Grandpa and Grandma were out in the garden or out on the farm during the day, why, he quietly took the family clock off the wall. One of these had a pendulum in it and struck on the hour. And he took it apart, and then he thought he had it back together all right before Grandpa and Grandma came back to the house that evening to get the chores done and get dinner. He hung it back up on the wall, and long about midnight, Grandma was awakened by the clock beginning to strike 1, 2, and it went on up to 11, 12, then struck 13 and 14. And Grandma woke up and says, "Hiram, wake up, wake up. It's later than you think." Because of the decrease in the numbers of Americans on the farm, the political voice of agriculture has decreased proportionately. There is no longer, as a practical matter, an effective farm bloc in Congress. Representatives of urban consumers dominate our national legislature. And what do they want? Lower food prices. If you don't believe the urban bloc controls Congress, just look at the legislation that the urban bloc has helped to pass. A mass transit subsidy bill, which is a wonderful thing for the nation's largest cities, passed in this Congress at your expense. You will help pay the cost, but receive little, if any, of the benefits. In Congress, there are 10 or more programs designed to help cities for every one of our farm bills. An urban congressman can pass about nearly anything they want. Look at the latest Supreme Court ruling on congressional redistricting, which through its one man, one vote approach further threatens the power of the farm bloc in Congress. The writing is on the wall, and the only way we can stem the urban tide is to develop unity in our approach to farm problems. Farm organizations must be leaders in the movement and agree themselves on what kind of programs they want. The time has come for our urban friends to realize that a strong and prosperous agriculture is to the benefit of everyone. They must realize the farmer's price is a minor part of food costs. Urban consumers cannot complain about a penny or two increase in costs in bread or milk when farmers are paying through the nose for everything produced in the cities by city labor. Look at how your farm machinery costs have climbed. You pay the bill for every wage boost in labor, and we should remind our city friends of that. This growing trend toward an urban Congress does pose a problem. These city congressmen could blow the whistle at any time on these subsidies, such as compensatory payments in farm programs. The farmer is asking for trouble if he makes himself dependent on the wills and whims of the city Congress for a major portion of his income. I believe that higher price supports are safer, and they might also help our livestock situation by reducing the supply of cheap feed. So the time has come for us to unite in our purpose and speak with authority before it is too late. And I know from experiences in the past, farmers are ready to meet this challenge. In closing, I do want to thank you for your attention this morning. And I want to thank your national president, Jim Patton, for the compliments he's paid me while I was on the Committee on Agriculture, not only for my vote on the wheat bill, but also for his recommendation that I be appointed one of the 5 congressmen in the newly created National Commission on Food and Marketing. And I also want to thank your GTA General Manager, Mr. Thatcher, for the fine praise he had for me on the wheat vote as he talked last night. Well, it's been a pleasure to be here with you, and if the voters send me back to Congress, I'll look forward to the bus trippers to Washington and to be there to welcome you, if I am there, to help give you as happy a time as possible in our great city of Washington. It's been a joy to be with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Moderator, Mr. Will, and Ben Radcliffe, an old legislative friend, fellow South Dakotians. The only thing I can thank you for today up to this particular time is the fact that you've invited me to have the opportunity to appear before you. I have not had any previous occasions in which I could have served you in any other capacity other than a member of the South Dakota legislature. And in that particular capacity, I feel that my record for farm and farm action and for the REA and the REA development and promotion is adequate and satisfactory, I think, to the groups who are concerned. As we all know, agriculture in the state of South Dakota is probably and will be for some time the greatest industry that we have. Notwithstanding the fact that we are rapidly approaching an end where we are pushing tourism. I think this is wonderful, and I think it's fine, and I think that we can more adequately promote this particular phase of our industrial development if we will just stop and think of what the opportunities are that have been presented to us under the Kennedy-Johnson-Humphrey philosophy under the Economic Opportunity Act. We can turn South Dakota into rather a land of infinite variety, a jack of all trades and a master of none, but into a land of recreation. And we have many, many opportunities to acquire assistance if we have a governor who will cooperate with the President of the United States in the promotion of the Economic Opportunity Act as it affects the state of South Dakota. I'm sure we will come November 3rd. As you know, and as I've stated, agriculture is the most important facet of our way of life here in the state of South Dakota, and as the farmer goes, so goes the rest of the population of this state. Up and down Main Street of our larger cities and even our smaller ones are wholeheartedly dependent upon the success of the farmer. And I notice that my opponent has made the statement that he supported the wheat bill, and that is correct, he did, rather reluctantly by actions on 2 previous parts of the bill, but one vote for agriculture, in my opinion, is not serving the cause of agriculture. There have been many, many occasions in which the congressman could have supported the whole program of agriculture, which we need so badly in the state of South Dakota. Not in part, but in full. Now, I have prepared a statement here that I am going to submit to you, and I hope that you will pay attention to my statements. This is billed because there are some statistics involved, and I'd like to have you follow them. The family type pattern of agriculture in this country has provided the initiative, skill, and prudent management which has made American agriculture the envy of all the nations throughout the world. Incentive payments to the food and fiber industry by the government began in 1942. There was a great need at that time to stimulate production of food and fiber for the war effort. Following the war, this nation demonstrated its compassion toward the war-torn countries of Europe and Asia by feeding the hungry through the Marshall Plan. Our food and fiber products did much to hold back the tide of communist expansion in Europe and the Middle East. The revolution in mechanized agriculture following the war was continued, and the abundance of food and fiber produced on American family farms has increased because of increased efficiency. The average yield of wheat during the 1941-50 decade was about 1,100,000,000 bushels. American wheat farmers during this period planted 77 million acres of land to wheat. By contrast, American farmers produced 1,133,000,000 bushels of wheat on about 45 million acres during the crop season of 1963. In addition, American farm output in 1963 was the greatest on record, and the production of red meat animals has increased 11% above the 1957-59 average yield. Most industries in this country enjoy prosperity and profit by increased efficiency. But the opposite has been the case with the agricultural segment of our economy. Recent agricultural policies have brought the voluntary supply management concept more in line with the effective demand of food products for domestic and foreign uses. This was accomplished in part by the vigorous efforts of the government and farm leaders to expand our export of American food products to foreign lands. Since 1960, we have reduced our so-called surplus from about 1¼ billion bushels to about 750 million bushels, or about 1/2 the surplus we had in 1960. The investment by the farmer in the modern farm plant has become heavy, but the incomes and the profits commensurate with the investment has not kept pace with other segments of our economy. To accomplish parity of income, I believe the farmer, in cooperation with the government, should set their sights towards a 5% return on their investment in the farm plant, and in addition he should receive a salary equal to that of skilled labor. I think that this is no more than fair. To achieve this, the family farmer should work with his farm organizations and in cooperation with the Department of Agriculture to achieve parity income by improving our farm programs, not eliminating them. It is through the farmers' friends in Congress, and only in Congress, can this be achieved. To improve these farm programs, I would like to say that I would support price supports, compensatory payments, acreage divergent payments, certificate payments, sufficient to maintain farm income at approximately the parity ratio as it relates to other commodity prices and services. In addition, I would support legislation and administrative directives aimed at revising upward the sale price of commodity credit corporation surpluses at about 115% of the support price of wheat. The net result of these suggestions would accomplish the following. First, the government costs would be less than they now are, because the government would realize a greater return on the sale of its present wheat inventory. 2, government takeover of grain under the loan program would be reduced, thus reducing the costs. I further recommend limiting the maximum amount a farmer may receive in farm program benefits to protect the family-type farm. In the course of my traveling around as a candidate through the 1st Congressional District, I have contacted many people in the farming industry, and in many cases they have emphasized and re-emphasized the necessity of curtailing the large operations in contrast and in opposition to the small farmer. They are not giving a fair opportunity to compete, and as a result they are being forced off the land, and this is one of the things that I think we should attempt to avoid. Then there is also a questionable proposition that, in my opinion, requires a considerable amount more research before we can make a final determination of this, but I think it has some merit. I think there might be some possibility that we could work something out on this, but again, I wouldn't want it to be a definite fact at this time. And that's the theory that you hear in so many cases about, if you're going to join the club, you better pay the dues. If you want to receive the benefits, you should pay the dues. And I have a notation here, and as far as conservation program payments, as to whether they should be paid to non-cooperators in the allotment program or not. Now, this is something that could be a little bit touchy, but it bears a lot more research. In my 3rd point, expanding our agricultural export trade with foreign nations, now up 20% over 1963, they have now reached $6.1 billion. 4, continue to implement and expand the administration's Food Stamp Act, which is aimed at assuring that every American has at least a minimal diet. 5, to continue to implement the school lunch, school milk, and food for peace programs. And I also say that at this time I support the rural area development program. Now, how's my time? I have more to say, of course, but I'll have to limit this. I have heard neither one of my opponents at the present time, or either one of the opponents on the other side, repudiate the actions of the man who is seeking the presidency on the opposition party. So I can assume from that that they support those things that he advocates. Now, what is the stand of our opponents in this situation? They have advocated a final solution to the farmer. They have advocated a final solution to the farm problem. They have advocated a final termination of all farm programs. Now, the Republican office seekers have supported the man who heads their ticket. He's running for president. What has he said? He has said that the agricultural budget, meaning the farm programs, present the best opportunity we have to balance the budget. He has not said that one of the most likely places where cuts might be made is national defense, where 54 billions are being spent. Now, don't misunderstand me. I don't mean to reduce national defense to where it would be depriving any of our protection. But one of the best defenses is a good offense, and that is a good food supply and a reserve food supply that could carry this nation through in the case of an emergency. But he has said that, quote, doing something about the farm program means, and there can be no equivocation here, prompt and final termination of the farm subsidy program. Now I say to you this: every farmer must search his conscience between now and November the 3rd with the full knowledge that he is writing his own ticket for his trip into the future. No one else can make the choice for you. You will decide whether you want to progress with the Humphrey or the Johnson-Humphrey farm program, or whether you want to take the chance on the undecided, questionable look into the future with the opposition. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, President Radcliffe, fellow delegates, candidates, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to say that I notice amongst the other candidates here and the absent one that I notice I am the only one who wears a blue badge. I happen to be a member of the Farmers Union Co-op. And so therefore, never let there be any misunderstanding as to how I stand on farmer union problems when I am elected to the United States Congress. As I look out, I see 500, 600 of the most efficient business people in the world. You, the American farmer. I say that you are the most efficient because in the past 15 years, I know specifically that we have taken many hundreds of thousands of acres out of production, of wheat, other small grains, and you are still producing more. God bless you, and may you continue to do so. I would like to speak with you briefly this morning on the territorial problems as I see them that we are faced with in West River, South Dakota. These problems starting in the Black Hills are those of tourism, mining, logging, in Rapid City, the problem of industry, on our reservation, the problem of our jurisdiction, and certainly the problem of the rancher and the farmer. And these problems are not new problems. They haven't just been created in a political year 1964. These problems have been with us for years. My opponent has been well aware of these problems, and I challenge him in his 14 years in Congress to name one bill that he has introduced to help these problems be alleviated. I would like to remind you that our great president, Lyndon B. Johnson, in outlining the agricultural position of this administration, has said we are dedicated to these concepts and these goals. Number one, to commodity programs to protect and preserve our family farm system. Number two, to community programs to create job and income opportunities for our farm youth. And number three, to consumer programs to develop new uses for food at home and abroad. You know, my opponent, all of his billboards today are reading, "Vote for experience." Now, there's two kinds of experiences. There are good and there are bad experiences. And I challenge you, the voters, to weigh these when you go to the poll November the 3rd of this year to think whether your experiences with my opponent have been good or bad over the past 14 years. It is not surprising to me to see my opponent absent this morning. I have challenged him on many occasions to debate me publicly. As a matter of fact, on 6 occasions, he has accepted once, and I might say that his attendance record at the debates is about the same as his attendance record in the United States Congress. During the 87th and 88th Congress, he has an absentee record of 23%. He is representing you just about 3/4 of the time, with just about a half a loaf when you so richly and fully deserve the full loaf of representation. My opponent, who is running for Congress or from Congress, I haven't decided which yet, in the West River District, voted against the voluntary wheat certificate plan. And oh, how I wish he were here this morning to talk with his fellow seatmate of his same party and ask him to explain why he voted for it when he voted against it. That would be a great debate. And I say to my opponent that by voting against the voluntary wheat certificate program, that he is voting only for 50% of parity for wheat, yet he constantly complains that returns from the wheat certificate plan is too low. And I agree, it is too low. But what does he propose? He tried desperately to kill the voluntary wheat certificate bill, which was introduced by our Senator George McGovern, and thus throw wheat farmers into a price skid that would drop wheat to $1.25 a bushel with no certificate. He says that wheat farmers will make less under the 1964 program than they made in 1963. But what he fails to say is that the 1964 voluntary certificate program is preventing an additional $20 million drop in wheat income in South Dakota this year. My opponent proposes to elect as President of the United States a man who says, and I quote, "Now there is one specific law I would get rid of, and that is the Agricultural Act." End of quote. And also, quote, "The only way to persuade farmers to enter other fields of endeavor is to stop paying inefficient farmers for produce that cannot be sold at free market prices." Or, how do you like this famous Goldwater quote? "If we allowed a continuation of the normal tendency which has been existing in this country since its founding, that is, the drifting away from the small farm, those affected might be more gainfully employed by working for the larger farmers or by working as mechanics, for example." End of quote. I say there is very little concern evidenced by these remarks. And those who complain about low farm prices and advocate the election of a man who wants farm prices to go so low they will bankrupt most of the farm population demonstrates nothing but their low opinion of the intelligence of our South Dakota farmers. I believe federal programs do for our farmers and ranchers what they as individuals cannot possibly do for themselves to increase their incomes. This administration has also moved vigorously to strengthen the beef market and to reduce beef and veal imports. Imports were rolled back to about the 1959-63 level through voluntary agreements, and stockmen's associations throughout the West have voiced their high approval, which my opponent said was not strong enough to bolster prices. The USDA has also stepped up beef purchases and is cooperating with industry in a vigorous promotion program here and abroad. The average price of choice-fed steers has advanced about $5 a hundredweight since early June. The necessity for commodity programs to help in managing overproduction has been proven a number of times by independent groups outside the USDA, and the consensus is remarkable. My opponent contends that the only major factor in the spring slump in beef prices was meat imports. And oh, I've heard it again and again and again during this campaign. I contend that a man with such an elemental understanding of the ranch problem simply isn't competent to serve in the United States Congress. When elected, I pledge my support of administration proposals which will substantially increase the income of South Dakota farmers. And I would like to turn now to the community development aspect of the food and agricultural program for the 60s. For many years, the nation's efforts to solve agricultural problems have focused largely on the problems of various farm commodities. Only recently have we started to cope effectively with the human problems of people on submarginal farms, to assist communities which need to diversify their economic base if they are to survive, and to move against the widespread cancer of poverty in rural America, and to think of the growing needs of families and individuals in cities and suburbs for land and water and space where they can live more abundantly. This administration has set out to meet some of those needs through a variety of approaches, particularly through a nationwide rural areas development program. A significant part of the rural community development program of our administration was the passage of the President's program to wage war on poverty. I support the President in this program, and my opponent, by his negative vote, is apparently not interested in rural poverty. I contend that when the farmer and the rancher are prosperous, that same prosperity rubs off onto the Main Street businessman, and that together, by their unity of interest, they represent the strength of rural America. Consumer programs, the third dimension in our agricultural policy, aims at making better use of our tremendous abundance, both at home and abroad. It is also directed at protecting consumers through strengthened inspection and grading, and by helping to make more efficient the marketing system. Exports have also been expanded. We are exporting the produce of 1 acre out of every 4, and in the case of wheat, it is 1 acre out of every 3. Total farm exports set an all-time record for the fiscal year ending last June 30th, topping $6 billion. South Dakota's share of the 1963 export trade amounted to almost $60 million and was equal to about 10% of South Dakota's total cash farm income, which was $658 million for the 1963 crop. All of the far-sighted programs of which I have spoken and which I endorse are opposed by my opponent, E.Y. Berry, and his great standard bearer, Barry Goldwater. I'm glad it's the fall of the year because it reminds me of berry canning time. In 1955, E.Y. Berry, in a news release quoted by the Washington Daily News, said that he believed failure to boost support prices on next year's crop would mean political suicide for the Republican Party and economic suicide for the farmer. Today, 9 years and a bushel basket full of negative votes later, in 1964, he and Barry Goldwater favor placing agriculture back under the law of supply and demand. Indeed, Barry Goldwater has said, doing something about the farm problem means, and there can be no equivocation here, prompt and final termination of the farm subsidy program. If my opponent Barry has a different point of view than his friend Barry Goldwater, I call upon him to explain it. I say that I stand for a strong America in a world at peace. And one way to keep America strong is to maintain the security of the family farmer and maintain family farming, which is the very backbone of our democracy as a way of life in this country. I say that I favor a fair income for South Dakota's farmers and ranchers, and by this I mean that we must set parity as our goal and keep fighting for that goal. And I would like to remind you what Vice Presidential candidate Hubert H. Humphrey said to a group of farmers addressing them at an REA meeting in Minnesota the other day. And I concur with him 100% when he said that any farmer who receives the benefits of REA and votes for Barry Goldwater should stumble around in the dark for the rest of his life carrying a kerosene lantern. And I say to you, my fellow farmers and ranchers here this morning, that any farmer who votes for Barry Goldwater should be ready, willing, and able to return to the good old days the days that Senator Goldwater advocates, the good old days, I've seen them, you've seen them, of the kerosene lamp, the wood-burning stove, and the outdoor toilets. In conclusion, I've written a little poem about my opponent that I would like to leave you with. EY's record is negative and slow. He won't admit we're on the go. A new America we've got to create. So long, EY, you're too late. This is a jet age, we have things to do. We can't tarry and wait on you. Now with your support, I'm sure we'll sigh, so long to old EY. Thank you.
Are for the farmers. Why is there so much beef import? George, can you answer that for us?
Yeah, very glad to do that. I think that you'll... Can you hear me? Who are for the farmer, why is there so much beef import? Well, I would say that the record shows that there is roughly about 11% increase in the production of beef in the United States, and that this production was stimulated by opportunities that presented themselves in raising more beef. I mean, you have a situation in this country today where there are 13 states raising beef today that 10 years ago never even thought of raising beef. The high choice rate of beef that was going to market was not adequate for hamburger and bologna and sausages and so forth, so therefore it was necessary to import a small percentage. But a solution to that problem, if one wants to get one, is not too difficult. I would say that if we paid a slight bonus of approximately $15 or $20 to all female cattle, which would put this on for slaughter cattle, that is, any cow or heifer, if you pay a bonus to that and get that off the market for slaughter, we would soon reduce. But you find that there's no veal on the market today to amount to anything. People are carrying this stuff out and they're raising 3, 4, 5 more head than they ever raised before. And by the same token, we have had a small amount of import. However, the President and the Democratic Congress did submit a bill to restrict beef imports. As I remember, my opponent, who made considerable amount of hue and cry about this beef import, wasn't in Washington at the time the bill was presented for consideration, and he required action and didn't cast a ballot, if I'm correct on that. But I don't think that the beef import is the major issue in our surplus of beef. We've got more people raising beef, and they're all raising more heads per raiser, plus the fact that they're putting more pounds on each beef. I hope that answers the question.
It's quite obvious. In my district, there are over 500,000 people. In the other district, there are less than 200,000. And the one-man, one-vote approach, decision of the Supreme Court in this direction, will mean that a decision will have to be made by the legislature of South Dakota, and the governor of the state, when this matter comes up for a decision, to divide the state in such a manner as to provide an equal balanced population between the two districts. So the question there is to whether you divide it one way or north and south or east or west or however you do it. But I suspect that, I know that if this reapportionment decision is made, that it will provide the East River District with a greater voice, proportionately speaking, mathematically, in the Congress than the West River, because now the West River has, say, 200,000, and they elect one vote in the Congress, and in the East River District there are over 500,000 people, and they have only one vote in the Congress. So you can see that redistricting would bring about a better balance of representation of the people in the state of South Dakota, particularly the East River District, if this division is worked out in some fashion by the legislature that will be taking into account all of the various aspects of the differences in the West River versus the East River, and still maintain the principle established by the decision of the Supreme Court that you have one man and one vote.
Mr. May has asked for an opportunity to comment on this same question, and we'll give him just a few seconds. Will.
Thank you, Will. I think it's very important that we call and remind the people of the state of South Dakota that in the 1961 session of the legislature, that the legislative body at that time had a wonderful opportunity to equalize the vote in the state of South Dakota. We've tried every method in the world to try to come up with some kind of a solution to balance out the weight of the East River as compared to the West River, and got no place. The only thing that was accomplished as a result of the opportunity to equalize our voting strength was they gerrymandered a senator from Brown County and carried him clear across and dropped him into Pennington County. Now, I don't mean to say that Pennington County wasn't justified in having an additional senator, but the only objective that they had, even before the legislative session started, was to deprive Brown County of their senator with 36,000 people and put it to jump it over 16 districts that only had 9 or 10,000 people. So, I mean, the opportunity, we did not have to go to the Supreme Court if we actually wanted to be taken to more adequately justify our voting setup in South Dakota. This could have been done by the Republican-controlled legislative body in Pierre in 1961. Thank you.
Our next question, or perhaps I should say 5 questions of the same vein, are addressed to Mr. Lindley. In view of the fact that South Dakota is spending thousands of dollars to promote industry in our state, and other states are making adjustments to encourage industry, don't you think it disastrous for us to put this tax on industry as you advocate? There are 4 other questions phrased practically the same way.
These businesses left South Dakota because of the property tax as a result of the 55 tax law, which my opponent promoted as Speaker of the House of Representatives. Businesses moved out of the state because the property tax became too high. They're sitting outside now in Bismarck and Fargo and in Omaha and in the Twin Cities and other places coming in and competing. I propose that they pay in lieu of a property tax, a tax such as the banks are now paying here in the state. In lieu of that, and operating that way, the person outside the state will pay the same as in. Let me tell you this. The study that was made by Andrew Sharp, who the last I knew grew up and was until he died a Republican, showed that the industrial development came in the areas where you have this type of corporate tax, rather than in your area where you have the high property tax. My proposal will increase the opportunity for industrial development in the state. After all, we've had the other all through the years, and where's the industry that they're going to bring in? My proposal will get some.
This question now for Lieutenant Governor Nils Boe. What is your stand on the REA and the fair, and this in parenthesis, or fall, playbill? What is your stand on the REA?
I want to thank you, ladies and gentlemen, sincerely from the bottom of my heart, to be able to explain this personally, so that you can hear it from my own lips. Contrary to what has been said throughout the past 2 years, I believe that REA should be perpetuated and maintained at all costs throughout all areas of South Dakota. I believe that South Dakota is large enough, great enough, and that we have people in the state of South Dakota who will be willing to see that we can have the rural cooperatives, that we can have municipal power companies, and we can have private power companies
all living side by side in South Dakota, helping to promote the welfare of all of the peoples. REA has done a tremendous amount of help and given a tremendous amount of help to South Dakota as it has to the Northwest area and to all areas of the United States. It is serving a purpose and always will serve a purpose. And I say to you now that if anybody says that I am here or standing here or at any time have done anything to try to destroy REA, I wish that I could have a further opportunity to visit and talk with you. I have made an opportunity, ladies and gentlemen, taken the time during this past number of weeks and months to visit with various REA members, various REA boards, particularly in the southeastern part of the corner, to see if there could be some understanding, or if there might not possibly be a misunderstanding. On each of the occasions, I came away with the feeling and being told also that there had been probably a lack of communication, as I have referred to in the past, with respect to what might have been attributed to me and what was actually the case. I was invited, and I certainly wish to thank Mr. Dale Gibbs for the opportunity of meeting with the legislative committee of the REA Association of the State of South Dakota, which I did a few weeks ago. I have proposed, ladies and gentlemen, and I have stated, and I say to you this now, the greatest damage that has been done to the rural cooperatives is the fact, and I don't believe it's been done purposely, but is the fact that the question, the dispute, the purported conflict, whatever it may be, has been thrown into the legislative arena and made a political football. I say that not with the idea that anybody has purposely done so, but I do say it, and my opponent knows it because he sat for one term in the legislature, knows that oftentimes when you get into the legislature with such questions as business conduct and the operation of businesses, all too often they become the subject of politics, and that is a shame and should not be. And for that reason, I have suggested, and on each occasion when I have suggested this plan, I think it has been met with approval. And I want to give it to you today, that if I am elected governor of the state of South Dakota, the first act that I will do, and I make this as a pledge, will be to invite such representatives as the rural cooperatives may wish to send, such representatives as the municipal power companies will wish to send, and such representatives as the private power companies may wish to send, to come to the governor's conference room in Pier, and there to sit 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months if necessary, and to resolve and attempt to resolve whatever disputes they may have with respect to their conflict of interest in regard to one industry, namely the electric industry, and the transmission of electric power to all persons in the state of South Dakota. I will sit at this conference table for as long or as often as these representatives wish me to so do. And at such time as they agree upon a solution to the problems, whether it be territorial, integrity, or whatever it may be, I have stated, and I now repeat the statement, that upon that agreement and understanding, I, as the governor of the state, would, with the legislation there submitted, go to the legislature and say, this is the legislation which the industry itself feels they can live with, and which, if it is not prejudicial to the public interest, certainly then should be passed. This is what I would attempt to accomplish, ladies and gentlemen, because I feel that the electric industry, just because it's the rural cooperatives, just because it's private power, and just because it's municipal power, should not be throwing their problems into the legislative hopper without at first trying to sit down, and yet they want an arbitrator or someone to sit with him, then the governor of the state should be ready to do so. Business of this character should first of all try to solve their problems. I am convinced, and I say this with all sincerity, ladies and gentlemen, that the reason that there has not been a solution to date has been the fact that, as oftentimes occurs, there are suspicions, there are fears, there's the matter of personal greed or whatever it may be, on the part of all parties. And if these can be removed,
And if these parties could sit down and they could say, we'll go this far if you will not go this far, and there could be a meeting of the minds and agreement, I know there could be a solution. And the REA, the municipal power companies and private power companies, can live together amicably and well, and all serve towards promoting the best interest of the state of South Dakota. And I pledge you that that would be my objective if I obtained the office of Governor of the state of South Dakota.
Which I'd like to get to in a moment, but since there has been a question from the floor regarding REA addressed to Mr. Lindley, and since he has asked for an opportunity to comment on Mr. Boe's remarks, may we give him that opportunity at this moment?
The issue is very clear on REA. Senator Goldwater, in Sioux Falls in 1962, said when the private power companies want to move in, REA should move out. When you have 30 members on a system, and you need 30 members to support that system and to finance it, and 8 or 10 of those are within the first mile of town, and you take out that first mile, it leaves too much of a burden on the remainder to sustain and support the system. You aren't going to get the companies that want to swallow you up to agree to anything in a contract. You have to be protected. And I propose that I will give you that protection if I have a legislature that will go with me with my recommendations. I want REA. I know what REA means. I was raised on a farm without it. I am for REA and for its continuance in the state.
This question now addressed to Mr. Brown. How can the youth work camps, as proposed in the poverty bill, help the youth of this state and the state as a whole?
I was amazed to recently find that in America today we have approximately 1,250,000 young people between the ages of 18 and 24 who are unemployed. Of this 1,250,000, I was further amazed to find that approximately 25% of them cannot read and cannot write. This is why the poverty bill was introduced as a youth conservation program. Can you imagine being 19 or 20 years old today seeking employment and not being able to read the newspaper to find a job, or once securing a job by perhaps going door to door and asking, and the man says, fill out the employment application, and you can't read or write? What would you do? What would you turn to? Crime to feed a hungry wife and a family? And this is why the poverty bill for our youth conservation has been inaugurated. The question, I believe, was what will it do for South Dakota and the other states? I say that this will grubstake our society greater than any other program inaugurated in the past 20 years. And I know friends of mine who now live in Custer that were first attracted to Custer during the CCC days. They were certainly ready, willing, and able to work. All they needed was the opportunity. And I would like to remind you that the Youth Conservation Program, the part which is part of the poverty bill, is a voluntary program. It is a two-phase program. One of it is to train youth in conservation of our natural resources such as water, forestry, wildlife, and the other phase is to train them in the maintenance and operation of the equipment necessary to fulfill these functions. The exact number of youth that may sign up for our poverty program that will be South Dakota youth, I have no idea. But I do know that, in my opinion, it is one of the best programs ever inaugurated. The youth that we help and train today, by teaching them good things and good practices, we will be able to eliminate, I hope, in our penitentiaries of tomorrow.
And told me an hour and a half ago that we might have a few extra moments, and but he wouldn't mind if we ran just a little late. We'll try in the next 10 minutes, if we may, to get a question addressed to each of the members of the panel. For Mr. May now, would you as a congressman have supported the mass transit subsidy bill for the big cities as Senator McGovern did? George?
should all recognize that all of our areas of the nation today are having problems. And I'm sure that you're aware of the fact that all of the people that are traveling on the highways of the state of South Dakota are not from the state of South Dakota. The same thing applies in these compacted areas on the East Coast and the West Coast. And I'm sure my opponent, who has resided in Washington for the past few years, is cognizant of the fact that it takes you all the way from 3 to 4 hours to get from the Capitol building to the outskirts of the city of Washington, D.C. I believe that it's absolutely essential that we provide facilities to make it possible for the people who are employed in various parts of the compact areas of our country to have facilities available to them to be able to get to and from work. How else can they do it with the conditions as they are now today? So completely bugged and tied up with this tremendous automobile movement that we have. There are areas of the United States, as you well know, in California and in the eastern part and the southeastern part of the United States where it takes you hours on hours to go just a few miles. We can check, for example, in the city of Minneapolis, just a little bit to the east of us, where it's almost impossible to get to downtown Minneapolis. I say that it's almost impossible to expect to get any support for agricultural programs or South Dakota development if we're going to constantly refuse to recognize the needs of other areas of our country. And I don't mean just giveaway programs, I mean definite needs. And the rapid transit bill, in my opinion, is a definite need because the automobile industry has been one of our biggest booms and biggest boons to our economy, and we have to do something to alleviate this problem in these compact areas. Yes, I would support the rapid transit bill. Thank you.
Now addressed to John Frank Lindley. Many businesses are being subsidized by the federal government. Very few of these subsidies have been terminated. The tendency is for more subsidizing. In your estimation, would it be reasonable to assume that in the future, businessmen who aren't subsidized will be asking for a subsidy? If so, then what will happen?
Congress, and I think that was a proper question addressed to Congress. However, I think that I can turn it into my industrial development and my recreational development here in South Dakota. And that is that when we have something that will come in here and into our Indian areas or into any other area, I think that the state of South Dakota should be providing for that industry that comes in the opportunity to have this low-cost energy from the Missouri River instead of letting it run over here into Minnesota and into Iowa and into Nebraska, not used here in the state where it's produced. And to the extent of such subsidies, to the extent that such things will benefit South Dakota, of course I'd support it. And anything that I could get done to encourage business to come here, working through Senator McGovern, anything that I could bring into South Dakota by working with President Johnson, I'm proud to be on the same billboard with him over this state. I'm proud to be running with President Johnson. And as far as his subsidy proposal is concerned, for industry, if anything will help bring industry to South Dakota, you bet I'll be for it.
I have a question here now addressed to Nils Boe. It has to do with the farm market road situation. It was in the news just yesterday, and Mr. Boe, can you tell us your feeling about this road situation, whether or not it's going to be possible to expand the farm market roads?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think the matter of turning our attention to the gravel farm-to-market roads, as well as the excess roads leading to our recreational areas, which are presently already on the state highway system, is a must. It is imperative. It is necessary that we proceed immediately. We all realize that, yes, we have cities of relative size, Huron, Aberdeen, Rapid City, Sioux Falls, Mitchell, Yankton, and the like. But I still say, and I think you'll all agree, that the backbone of the state of South Dakota still is the small town. And we can proceed with the construction of interstate highways and our fine primary highways. That should not be relaxed, because they too are serving a purpose, and it will be continued. But by the same token, we must then
where the legislature in past years has seen fit to place these farm-to-market roads on the state highway system, and by its wisdom felt that it was necessary in order to protect the small towns, we must proceed immediately to put them into such a condition that they will be used. Let us recognize that we are fast progressing now into an era where gravel roads today are the same as Dumbo was 25 or 50 years ago. And in order to keep the bond and the link in the union between the agricultural areas and the small towns, which I repeat once again is the backbone of the state of South Dakota, we must do everything possible to see that these farm-to-market roads, and I am referring now to the roads which are presently on the state highway system and consisting of approximately 1,000 miles. These must be taken care of by hard surfacing, and the access roads to our recreational areas must be taken care of by immediate hard surfacing. Otherwise, we will not be bringing the persons in who should be having the use of the recreational facilities that we are seeking to develop. How can this be done? I have recommended that it be done over a 5-year period, and it can be done, yes, by increasing the amount of funds which before have been diverted into the state budget, I agree, and which can be sent back and distributed among the secondary gravel farm-to-market roads and access roads, and over a 5-year period, I say that we can. And the Highway Department, irrespective of what the Democratic State Chairman, Mr. Noonan, says, agrees with my solution and agrees with my plan. That would be a part of my program, I assure you. Because of the lateness of the hour and because the additional questions that I find before me addressed to Mr. Brown, who would be the logical person to address you next, are questions that I'm sure have been answered by his remarks, either in other answers to other questions or in his introductory remarks. I think that this must conclude our session. May I thank each of you for being here and for President Radcliffe inviting me to come to moderate this panel. It's been a great joy to me to be with you and to be with these distinguished gentlemen on my left and on my right. Thank you again.